Thank you so much, Kida, for this very kind introduction. Indeed, an extremely, very timely session. Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for taking the time for being here in person. That makes things much more easier than having you here via a video link. But obviously, you're here in person, and for a good reason, because much to talk about throughout the next 25 minutes. Jordanian diplomacy, Prime Minister, has never been so vocal and active, it seems, and for a good reason. Your country, of course, is finding itself in the crossfire of a war that has the potential to derail and destabilize your national security and expand into larger regional conflict. Now, we all know we've gone through many cycles, unfortunately, of violence of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts over the years and decades. But the magnitude and impact of the latest outburst of violence, that one seems and feels different, doesn't it?
Thank you so much, Ali. It's a pleasure and honor to be on this session with you. And I want to thank the distinguished MC for the kind words in the presentation, and indeed to thank our hosts, the Qatari government, for putting together this magnificent event and forum that has been ongoing for the past 20 years. Absolutely. The magnitude is a magnitude that's quite unprecedented in terms of the toll that it has taken on human lives. Today, just coincidentally, happens to mark the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. Evidently, that global instrument that embodied a lot of principles that seem to be denied to the Gazans and to the Palestinian people, who have been at the receiving end of probably the full menu of atrocities and war crimes and crimes against humanity in what has been, by all standards, disproportionate and arguably actions that are not governed by the necessity that is commensurate to the catastrophic loss in life that the Gazans have suffered. 18,000 deaths, 50,000 injured, 65% of the deaths are among children and women, and evidently this is not something that can be described as precedented in terms of the scale and in terms of the magnitude. So yes, it is entirely different, and it has to dawn on all of us that if the international community, if we all don't treat things the day after and now, immediately, by bringing a ceasefire that saves lives and that stops this carnage and indiscriminate killing that is bordering on becoming a genocide, that we will probably devolve into uglier scenes in a year or two that will not endanger, again, the fragile status quo and peace and stability that we aspire to see in this region, but that will go beyond it. And we can see today that the longer that this carnage and killing machine that is directed at Gazans continue, the more the prospects of an expanded regional conflict become real. And we can basically see reverberations in the region that suggest that we might be seeing such an expansion, particularly as those atrocities committed by the Israeli army continue. So it is unprecedented in scale. And if we leave things as they are, and in the context of the management that preceded this particular outbreak of hostilities on 4 occasions in Gaza, and assume that we will end up with different results, it will be succumbing to the notion of embodying insanity, which is attempting to basically do the same thing repeatedly and expect different results.
Yeah, it's very clear that you are concerned, and for the right reason, about an escalation of conflict, something that King Abdullah, of course, has warned about numerous times, about the conflict spreading to other countries in the Middle East. Lebanon, of course, comes to mind, but also wider escalation, especially and potentially involving Iran. We just had the Iranian foreign minister speak here right before us. The whole region is on the brink of falling into abyss, says King Abdullah. Clearly, the concern on your part, on the King's part, on Jordan's part, is there and quite justified. Now, the issue of refugees, of course, is one that your country is being focused on quite a bit. Jordan is, of course, already home to a very large population of Palestinian refugees and their descendants. And you have raised concerns that millions of Palestinians could be pushed out of Gaza and the West Bank into Jordan and Egypt for that matter. Now, you and King Abdullah has made it clear that this would be a red line, that Jordan would not, under any circumstances, would accept refugees. That is the red line that cannot be crossed.
This is a material violation of the provisions of the Jordan-Israel Peace Treaty. I can refer you clearly to Article 2 of the Jordanian-Israeli Peace Treaty that fundamentally prohibits any forced movements of population. This is one of the pivotal provisions in the Jordan-Israeli Peace Treaty, and the violation of this provision would certainly constitute not only a red tape, but a flagrant material violation of the peace treaty that we have always respected, we expect others to respect, and we will definitely have recourse to other means that are available to us in the event that such a material breach occurs. Now, our concern did not depart from a vacuum. Our concern from the outset departed from a lot of statements and a lot of many actions that occurred in Gaza and that still occur in Gaza that suggest that there is a deliberate attempt to generate and create conditions for Gazans, coupled with increased violence in the West Bank by settlers in specific, that seem to be directed in the direction of generating conditions that would compel people to consider the option of moving across the border. In the direction of Egypt, in the direction of Jordan, our position has been clear. The Egyptian position has been clear on that front. We coordinate closely with our Egyptian friends and brothers, and to us this is definitely a red tape and potentially a game changer. But we're quite reassured that we're on the same page here with the globe in general, with the international powers that be, including by our friends in the American administration, who have repeatedly stressed the point that for them mass expulsions are not acceptable, the reoccupation of Gaza is not acceptable, the increased settlement violence in the West Bank is not acceptable, and any alteration with the historic and legal status quo of the Muslim and Christian holy sites, of whom the king is the custodian by virtue of the historic Hashemite custodianship, is not something that would be tolerated.
Philip Lazzarini, of course, was on this very stage yesterday of the UN, talked about the dire situation for refugees, that it's probably the worst he's seen in his career, so the pressure will be on for Jordan and Egypt in the coming weeks and months, I suspect. You mentioned the Israeli-Jordan peace treaty. Now, of course, long before the Abraham Accords, your country had normalized relations and signed a peace treaty with Israel almost 3 decades ago, back in 1994. But since the war on and in Gaza began, of all Arab states, it is Jordan that has been the harshest in its words for Israel. Amid this crisis, your foreign minister, Ayman Safed, said what Israel is doing is not self-defense, but committing war crimes. And you yourself, actually, you've said, and I quote, "The peace treaty is a piece of paper collecting dust." You have recalled your ambassador from Tel Aviv and asked the Israeli ambassador, if I'm not mistaken, not to return to Israel, to Amman rather, until the Israeli bombardment of Gaza ceases. There's a lot of pressure also on the part of your citizens, isn't it, to take a harder line against Israel as the war in Gaza rages on?
We have always, Ali, matched principle, word, and deed together. We embarked on the peace process in Madrid as a strategic option that sprung from commitment and conviction, in as much as Jordan is concerned. And we invested in it as a route that will fundamentally deliver the Palestinian rights, and chiefly among them the Palestinian right of self-determination, through the establishment of the independent sovereign Palestinian state along the borders of pre-June 64, 1967, with East Jerusalem as a capital of that state. and that would live side by side in peace and harmony with all the states and people of the region and security, including the State of Israel. It's an effort that we have been always invested in, continue to be invested in. For the past 10 years, His Majesty the King has been pointing to the fact that any attempts to short-circuit or to ignore the objective of realizing the two-state solution is simply and easily not attainable. The floating of piecemeal solutions and extending and immersing in too many processes and too little peace as a deliverable is not something that's sustainable and fundamentally will take us into vicious cycles of violence, interrupted by pauses, and then further deeper, more vicious cycles of violence like the ones that we have witnessed recently in Gaza. In the context of all of this, and in the context of not being able to achieve the primordial objective, the entire Madrid peace process, which is delivery of the two-state solution, frankly speaking, the piecemeal approaches will never allow the region to unleash the full potential that comes with comprehensive peace, at the heart of which needs to be the Palestinian-Israeli peace that in turn has to be predicated on the premise of the materialization of the two-state solution. So no regional cooperation would be to its fullest, no regional integration can be achieved. The latest calamity in Gaza is just a further testimony that if you ignore the core, which is the absence of the realization of the Palestinian aspirations, the bilateral peace agreements, whether the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement or the Jordanian-Israeli peace agreement, or prior to that, the Oslo Accords between the PLO and the Israeli government, or the peace agreements that ensued as a result of the Abrahamic Accords, will always be limited in their capacity of implementation, their ability to mobilize and unleash the full potential of the region, and at times really stall and take us to a status quo ante that is quite disruptive and might jeopardize whatever small progresses we achieved in those contexts, while the bigger picture, the bigger objective is lost on us.
Yeah, so judging by what I'm hearing here, the peace treaty, the Jordanian-Israeli peace treaty will continue to collect dust. That is what I'm gathering here.
We're hoping that this would be a wake-up call that would fundamentally place things back on track in the context of regenerating a benchmarked, clear-cut, watertight approach. And I'm not going to use the word process, because I think that for the past 30 years, again, we have had too much and too many process and too little peace. But probably a benchmarked approach with strict timelines, with sacrosanct dates that would fundamentally deliver the two-state solution, so that we can all work fundamentally on regional peace and on unleashing the full potential of this region and achieve economic integration that's quite necessary and meet common challenges, not only in the field of security, but also environmental concerns, economic cooperation, dealing with the problems of scarcity of resources such as water, providing solutions in the context of AI, in the context of renewable electricity, and really creating synergies that we can definitely have in abundance and benefit not only the region, but the world. But this has to be preceded by resolving the core of the issue, which is stopping denying the Palestinians their basic fundamental rights. This is something that we cannot shortcut, and things will not happen in progress unless we achieve that.
And Palestinian rights is, of course, something that you and your country has stood for many decades, supporting the two-state solution to this conflict with an independent state for Palestinians. We're far away from that at the moment. These days, the goals are much more short-term, such as establishing a ceasefire. Now, of course, Jordan has called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and a humanitarian truce, but the current and recent UN Security Council vote on the ceasefire, of course, has failed, with 13 in favor, the UK abstaining, and of course the United States as the only country vetoing. Now, I'm not revealing secrets here when I say that the role of the US, that Jordan is a very, very close ally of the US, has been so traditionally, has been so historically, but Israel's war on Hamas is threatening to destabilize those relations, isn't it, Prime Minister? I mean, you have canceled the summit scheduled to take place in your country, in Amman, in October, in which US President Biden was set to meet with some regional leaders. The role of the US in the region, and in particular the perception that you have of the US, the vote against the ceasefire in the UN in the Security Council does in a way eliminate the US as an honest peace broker now at the moment, doesn't it?
We view our bilateral relationship with the US as one that's strategic and historic in nature. The US is a major ally to Jordan. We certainly believe that the US has a central role to play the day after in the context of resuscitating a credible, again, approach that's time-bound, that is sacrosanct in terms of deliverables, that will bring about the two-state solution, and we believe that the US has that central role to assume. The nature of the strategic relationship that we have with the US allows us to always have frank discussions about areas in which we might have differences on approaches and regarding approaches.
But this is more than just a minor difference.
Certainly, the impunity and protection that Israel enjoys in terms of the application of the standards of international humanitarian law, international law for human rights, to Israel, and according protections in the context of forums such as the UN and the different bodies and organs of the United Nations, is something that we see as not quite helpful. But we are seeing a shift in the general direction and a tampering in certain positions. We've seen a lot of encouraging US statements about refusing displacement, refusing the occupation of Gaza and rejecting it outright, and the changing of conditions in Gaza. We are equally hopeful that the US will assume a leading role the day after, but also now, in perhaps really advocating a ceasefire that became necessary to ending the bloodbath in Gaza that we're seeing children suffer from, civilians suffer from, and also flagrant violations of international humanitarian law by targeting and assaulting protected instruments such as, and institutions such as the UNRWA facilities, such as hospitals, and indeed there are testaments to that. And the SG, the Secretary General Guterres, he pointed to the fact that basically the UN lost in this conflict, they lost lives of UN cadres that are more than any human lives that the UN lost anywhere in the world. This is something extremely telling. Those are serious discussions that we have with all of the global powers. And we believe that there is maybe a gradual slight shift, but it's going to take some time. But today our focus and attention has to be to bring everybody around to assume their responsibilities in really stopping the bloodbath in Gaza, because it is essential to do so. And to also, Ali, if I may add, depart from this mentality and idea that we have to look at Gaza from the prospect of basically managing the states of affairs in Gaza the day after. That will not cut it. You will not be able to basically find partners to manage the status quo and the state of affairs in Gaza the day after, unless this is basically part and parcel of a broader plan and approach that is time-bound, that has clear deliverables, clear KPIs, that treat both Gaza and the West Bank as an integral unit that aim at delivering within a fixed and clear timeline the independent, sovereign Palestinian state on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. This is something that we will continue to work on. This is something whose absence the King has been cautioning about for the past 10 years, and really advancing the idea that if we don't work on it, what we will always be faced with is a repetition of those sequences of violence, only to see them deeper and deeper.
Which we have unfortunately seen way too many times over the last few decades. That is for certain. Stopping the bloodshed, of course, is and has to be a humanitarian goal first and foremost. Queen Rania of Jordan, she has accused Western leaders of, and I quote, she's a glaring double standard for failing to condemn the death of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And indeed, many observers worldwide sympathetic to the plight of the Palestinians are, for instance, pointing towards the overwhelming support that Ukraine, for instance, has received since the war there in February 2022. Do you also feel you're very experienced? You're not just a prime minister, you're a very experienced diplomat also. When you travel throughout the world, is there a double standard by the West? Do Palestinian lives count less?
Ali, we always, and rightly so, we always hear the strong condemnations of anything that erodes the rule-based international order in other geographies in the world. By the same token, our general expectation is this should be extended indiscriminately to the entirety of the world. It should not stop at the gateways of a certain religion, race, ethnicity, geographic area, or border. And to that effect, I can tell you, any Palestinian life is not less valuable than any other civilian human life.
You and I know it's not, but that's the perception.
Arabs on day 2, in the extraordinary meeting of the Arab League Council on the 8th or 9th of October, unequivocally condemned any targeting of civilians. Regrettably, we did not see the same, despite the fact that we have 18,000 deaths today in Gaza and 50,000 wounded civilians in Gaza. And this is what really erodes and probably now places a pressure on the international rules-based system. And we hope to be able to basically really have a single standard and criteria that applies to all, because this is the safety valve for the international order that was erected after World War II.
You called the events taking place in Gaza a wake-up call, and for the international community to raise its voice. Some argue there's actually, for lack of a better term, a momentum now, an attention on the region once again that, let's be honest, has been forgotten, has disappeared from the headlines. Now the entire world is paying attention again. How are you going to seize this momentum? You talked a lot about the day after. How optimistic are you that the scenarios that you've laid forth here on this very stage are actually going to become real?
We will continue to push in that direction and to caution that basically if there are any illusions that we can approach it from the standpoint of attempting to create security arrangements that are exclusively about managing the security and daily management affairs in Gaza, this is not going to cut it. We need something that fundamentally, again, reintroduces the credible approach, political process that's benchmarked, timelined, with clear deliverables and KPIs and momentum and investment from all the parties, and the political will that needs to be generated and regenerated and triggered to put closure to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and to basically materialize the two-state solution, because this is what will bring real and true security to the Israelis, stability to the region, and prosperity to this region.
Do you understand the frustration? When I talk to people in interviews or on the street, they're saying, yeah, the Arab leaders are saying all the right things, and they've been saying the right things for many, many years. But here we are again, finding ourselves in a very delicate situation. And of course, you here again are reiterating the call for a two-state solution to respect Palestinian rights. But the reality out there looks different. The United States is still vetoing ceasefire resolutions in the UN Security Council. Do you feel powerless sometimes? I mean, you're the Prime Minister of Jordan. It's an important country in the region. Do you feel powerless at times?
We feel frustrated because there is a limited sometimes carrying capacity to what we can do based on our general size. But sometimes we can do much in the context of exercising a moral high ground and authority that we have in changing the course of things. And we have a track record of credibility that His Majesty has quite established with the globe in general terms, and good counsel and advice, that we will continue to exercise, and that is predicated really on principle and in not accepting to compartmentalize and to fragment the application of international standards and ethical standards based on geography, border, nationality, or ethnicity. And we will continue to do so because this is our currency in general terms. And we will not give up. We will continue to be optimistic. And we still believe that this is the only solution that will bring closure, that would fundamentally establish the needed prosperity, not only for the region, but also contribute to international peace and security. And the absence of that, trust me, things will only get uglier, and this level of violence will breed more extreme radicalization that we will see if we don't attend to it right now in 4 or 5 years.
Realistically speaking, if and when we meet here in 2024 for the Doha Forum, is this still the topic we will be talking about?
I certainly hope that the talk and the discussion would be different. It might not sound realistic to basically advocate that right now, but I would certainly hope that we would be in a place that at least would have taken us in a much more positive direction, but certainly with an end to this killing that's taking place in Gaza right now, not tomorrow, not next year.
Jordanian Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time. This is your applause. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Ali.